So hello everyone, my name's Asa Waldstein and I'll be your moderator today. So our panel today is titled, How to Legally Market Your Cannabinoid Company and Product. So this is really a huge question and there's no easy answer. But guess what everyone, we're in for a treat because we have some amazing experts. They're going to be reviewing this topic, how to legally market our cannabinoid company and product from a practical, legal, regulatory, marketing, and operational point of view. So we're in for a treat. So we're going to have about 10 minutes of open time for Q&A at the end. So feel free to get your questions ready, step up to the mic in the last 5 or 10 minutes. We'll do Q&A. So before we get started, I'm going to ask our wonderful panelists to introduce themselves. Why don't we start with you, please, at the end, Adam, and we'll work your way down, Henry and Natalie.
Great, thank you. I'm Adam Grossman. I'm the founder and executive chairman of Papa & Barkley. Is this on? We are a player in both the national CBD market as well as the California regulated THC market. We're primarily known for our topicals and tinctures, the medicinal categories, and so the products span from transdermal patches to pain bombs, which are non-psychoactive topicals, to ingestible CBD formulations with THC. And in the national market, we sell the same product line in terms of topicals and tinctures in retailers like Vitamin Shop and online nationally. And happy to be here today.
Hi, my name is Henry Baskerville. I'm the managing partner of Fortis Law. You can see it up there. Trial lawyer by trade. I also serve as outside general counsel for more than a dozen cannabis companies. And I'm a founder of a company called Legends of Hemp, where we partner with celebrities to help them launch their own CBD and hemp brands. So I have some real world experience in marketing as well.
And I'm Nathalie Bougenies. I'm the chair of the hemp practice group at Harris-Bricken, but we have been in the cannabis sphere for over 10 years now, following the legalization of cannabis in Washington state. I get to work with all kinds of stakeholders in the industry, advising them on whether to distribute and market their products in the US, but also helping international clients enter the US market. And I'm thrilled to be here.
Thank you so much for that. And really quickly about me, my name is Asa Waldstein. I'm the principal of Supplement Advisory Group. We are a regulatory consulting company focusing on practical marketing compliance for the web and social media. And has anyone heard of APA, the American Herbal Products Association, APA? Oh, yes, all right. APA is one of the top trade groups for the supplement and cannabis industries, and I have the great honor of being chairperson of their cannabis committee. So let's jump right in. Try to get this turned up a little bit. Let's jump right in, and let's start with you, please, Adam. It's my understanding that Papa & Barkley makes whole plant, full spectrum products. Do consumers understand the difference between broad spectrum, full spectrum, and isolated products? And why is this important?
Thanks for that question. No, I don't think consumers understand it at all. The manner that we make our products kind of extends from, I made the first product for my father's back in a crock pot. And so if you take cannabis flower and you cook it in oil over time, the full spectrum of cannabinoids, plant fats, terpenes, and other beneficial compounds transfers into the oil, and therefore that's a full spectrum product that has all of the medicinal components of the plant in it. That's distinct from the pharmaceutical route, which isolates an individual compound like CBD and matches it against an individual disease state like Dravet syndrome, for instance. The one CBD drug that has been approved by the FDA is Epidiolex. And so that pharma approach, where you're taking an isolate, using a chemical process with solvents to isolate an individual compound and then put that into your product, that's a distillate or isolate. And so what consumers should understand, and I should say a broad spectrum product, is where you utilize a distillation process which separates the different component parts, and then you reconstruct it by adding back terpenes and other medicinal components, different cannabinoids into the product. So on our side of the fence is more akin to plant medicine, where you're adjusting the full components of the plant. You're basically taking it naturally, utilizing more artisanal methods to keep that full spectrum profile. The pharma approach is more the isolate and distillate manner, and I think, you know, consumers need to understand when they're buying these products what the source cannabis or hemp strains are. Is it grown without pesticides and sustainably? That's our profile to make sure that that's the case. And then how is it processed and extracted and formulated so you know what you're putting in your body. So that's a brief overview.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. And let's dig into isolates a little more and bring Nathalie into the conversation. So I believe we're all aware on FDA's position that CBD, according to the FDA, CBD was investigated as a new drug, Epidiolex, before being marketed as a dietary supplement. So Nathalie, do people still worry about enforcement specifically related to CBD isolate? This is both from an FDA perspective and also an Epidiolex lawsuit perspective as well.
Well, I'm not aware of any lawsuits that have been brought yet, or even warning letters that specifically address the fact that Epidiolex has the monopoly over the use of CBD. But really, I think industry players should understand that if they're working with a CBD isolate, then they're more susceptible potentially to be sued for infringement by a company like GW Pharmaceutical. But I don't, you know, I think that eventually when we'll have regulations in place, there will be a distinction between, as Adam was explaining, this concept of full spectrum hemp and broad spectrum hemp versus an isolate or a distillate, because we're dealing with very different substances, and therefore the FDA will most certainly regulate these products differently. So whatever it is that you're using right now, I think that it's really important for you to understand, especially if you have somebody else manufacturing these products on your behalf, that you understand what you're selling and what your obligations are currently, but also start planning for these regulations that are right around the corner. I don't think that the FDA will come up with regulations for at least another year. But that said, I think that if you're interested in staying in the industry in the long run, it's critical for you to be in compliance and make sure that your products are safe and understand the risks of, you know, dealing with certain hemp-derived substances, such as isolates.
I love that. Thank you so much. And you know, everyone, we're in for such a treat. We've got Adam, Nathalie, and Henry, some of the top experts in their field. So let's bring you into the conversation, please, Henry. So in this era of lacking federal manufacturing lab testing standards, how should companies be thinking about this? How can they protect themselves?
Well, thanks for the question. You know, the 2018 Farm Bill contemplated a system where we could have some uniform testing. Of course, everybody knows that hasn't happened yet. And it's a big problem because I don't know of any other industries where if one particular compound in your product varies by 1/10 of a percentage point, your product goes from being legal to illegal and something that you'd potentially have to destroy. And my clients have seen that testing between different labs varies 20-30% sometimes on THC levels. People are finding heavy metals in some tests and not in others. I'm not sure if it's not following proper SOPs or what. And then, in addition, some states will do a conversion on the THCA in a particular product to multiply it by, I think, 0.88 to get what that would be in Delta 9. Other states don't do that. And so what I think you need to have is, going back to what your contract says, many people are buying products on invoices. And, I get it. You're trying to move fast in your company, but you're not thinking about what happens if this product turns out to be hot or has some other stuff in it and I get sued for products liability or whatever. So I think what you want to do is have a real contract in place with the company you're buying from, and make sure that you're not just trusting the tests that they give you. Because who knows, they maybe tested it 4 times and gave you the one that didn't show that their product was hot. So I would suggest, at least until you get to really know a manufacturer, anytime you use a new manufacturer, test the product yourself and make sure that you're getting what you're paying for.
I love that. Trust but verify. And I always like to say, if you're looking for a new manufacturer, ask them, if you're doing an ingestible product, if they're food facility registered, FDA food facility registered. And if they don't know what that is, run, because that's kind of the bare bones ticket of entry for any type of manufacturing in the US for food products, ingestibles. So we're here to talk about marketing. So we can't talk about marketing without talking about social media. So why don't we start with you, please, Nathalie? In most other industries, marketing on Instagram, Facebook, this is commonplace, but what are some of the complexities of the hemp industry? What are some of the problems that the hemp industry faces when marketing on social media?
I'm sure many of you are aware that for the past 18 months, the industry has been faced with major marketing obstacles, mainly getting letters from these companies, seeing their accounts deleted or blocked. And the main challenge really is that a lot of these companies do not have clear guidelines in place. A lot of the decisions are entirely discretionary, and they just don't really explain to you why they ultimately reached a decision of blocking or deleting your account. So, for instance, Facebook doesn't list CBD on their list of prohibited substances, yet I'm sure many of you probably in this audience have had issues with that company. Or other companies like Twitter, for instance, have slightly clearer guidelines, but the requirements that they impose on marketers tend to be more stringent than what you would find in most states. So we're just, again, finding ourselves with this patchwork of marketing regulations that makes it incredibly difficult for the industry to be in compliance. And unfortunately, I think that until we'll have federal regulations on the matter, we're going to be dealing with these problems. So it's critical, really, as an industry and as companies, that you carefully thread these waters and understand the risks. I think that if you're selling ingestible products, you're more at risk than if you were selling cosmetics, for instance. Saying certain things, we'll talk about claims in a little bit, but shying away from maybe words or claims that would immediately raise a flag, I think can be really helpful in mitigating the risks. But unfortunately, as of today, there isn't really a social media platform that's safer than another one, and that's just the reality that we're dealing with.
Thanks for that. Henry, anything to add?
Yeah, I would echo what Nathalie said. My company, Legends of Hemp, we do a lot of marketing on Instagram. And the biggest issue is that, their regulations say you can't promote anything that's illegal, but of course, hemp is absolutely legal. And they don't seem to get that part, and they don't apply their standards in a uniform way. Like maybe some of you saw this summer, they started taking down posts of people smoking, whether that's smoking a blunt, a joint, a hemp pre-roll, or a cigarette. They're just taking those posts down sort of arbitrarily. If your products, if you can clearly see the label and it says Delta 8 on it, they're taking those posts down often. So I think it's a little bit of trying to play a little game with them where you're showing your products, you're showing your label or your logo, but maybe not making exactly clear what's in there. I know that's not an ideal way to market your products, but at least they're not getting taken down. I mean, that's the same thing a lot of people do to sell their products on Amazon. Maybe some of you do it. Instead of having it say, CBD tincture, it says hemp oil tincture, which hint, hint, everybody knows is CBD, although ironically, hemp seed oil contains no CBD in it. So it's just these little sort of sleight of hands to try to get around whoever it is in the background at Amazon or Facebook or Instagram or Twitter who are sort of ad hoc taking stuff down.
Thanks for that. That's great. So Adam, I've been wanting to ask you this, so I get to ask you in front of all these wonderful people here. How does Papa and Barkley approach digital marketing? And do you have any tips for companies looking to market their hemp or THC products?
Sure, and I think my esteemed panelists make some good points which indicate that you really need to be pretty broadly distributed, and a lot of the things that you want to say about the product might be better put in, say, reviews by third parties that are using the products themselves. It implies that you have to, I think it makes sense, and I know, Asa, you do some of this work in terms of making sure for your real properties, your websites and blogs, that you have them reviewed by someone who is familiar with some of the terminology and the claims-related distinctions that we'll hear about a little bit later. But I think it's important to have multiple, what we do is at least is use multiple channels. We have an informational blog on plantmade.org that is simply educational and doesn't have any commercial activity. We have multiple accounts. If you want to have your Facebook page, as mentioned, you can only say hemp on it. And so I think you really need to do a diligent review of a variety of different places where you want your content. Each one is distinct, and really break it down and have a multi-layered channel strategy.
I love that. And does everyone out in the crowd know the distinction between an informational or educational blog compared to a product page blog? We're seeing these show up. My shtick, and my wife makes fun of me all the time, is that I read every FDA warning letter. So a really strong enforcement trend is blogs are showing up in a lot of these warning letters, FDA, FTC, or NAD type actions. So it's really important, as we're educating, to Adam's point, is to make sure that if we're going to have an educational page or educational blog, that we don't inadvertently turn that into a product page. So an example of an educational or informational blog turning into a product blog used to sell a product would be if you had a hyperlink. So on that informational page, hey, here's all these wonderful properties of curcuminoids, melatonins, hemp cannabinoids, and by the way, here's where you can buy my product. So it's the call to action. The call to action really elevates the risk from educational to product blog. And I'll be sticking around for a while to talk more about this. Indeed. So I think, we're doing pretty good on time. So why don't we talk about influencers? Does anyone out there use influencer marketing, influencers, affiliates, anything like that? A few people. Yeah, this is really interesting. Yes, I love it. This is the only way that my 20-year-old is informed about shopping decisions, is TikTok influencers. So I had her teach me before talking up here today. So as influencer marketing becomes more and more important, I was hoping maybe Henry and then Natalie, you could talk about best practices for setting up contracts. So I'm really surprised when I talk to people, in particular in the hemp and cannabis or hemp and marijuana industries, that a lot of influencers or brands using influencers or affiliates don't have contracts. So Henry, what are some common mistakes that you see when people set up contracts for influencers?
Well, I think you got to be very careful about who owns the intellectual property, right? You're using the influencer's name and their association. Is it their brand that you're using? Are they promoting your brand? If things go badly and you had a joint brand together and you want to go your separate ways, who gets to keep that brand and continue marketing it? Is that them or is that you? Those are some of the biggest things you got to. Obviously, you want to make sure that you're setting expectations of, if they're posting on their own accounts, how many times you think they should be posting in a particular month or whatever, whether they're posting on their story or on their main page or a reel. I mean, it's clear to what you want to do is set your expectations so that everybody understands this is what you should be doing and this is the amount of money you're going to get compensated for doing that. Perfect.
Thanks so much. Natalie, anything to add?
Yeah, I think when dealing with a substance like cannabis, I mean, it's mainly an issue that we've seen in the marijuana THC context, but still I think it's important for hemp stakeholders to grasp the fact that most influencers are not familiar with these regulations. I mean, they might be well aware of the FTC guidelines that apply to influencers, although I don't think that anybody should assume that, which is why it should be clearly stated in your contracts, and in fact, you should probably educate your influencers and have some sort of training in place, and having people like Asa, for instance, explaining to them the spectrum of claims that can be made and what the risks are. But I think it's really critical to educate your influencers as to what the marketing requirements might be within various jurisdictions, not just with the FTC and the FDA, because obviously they have yet to regulate these products. But you can potentially lose your license, especially in the THC context, if an influencer says something that is not allowed. And there is really little you can do to get your license back or to avoid financial penalties. So the risks are substantial, and it's precisely why you should have contracts in place and have very specific provisions about indemnification, for instance. But at the end of the day, you need to remember that the influencer is an extension of your company. It is an agent, a representative of your company. And so you can't just assume that they can say whatever they want because they're not your company. They are. Under the law, they absolutely are. And just make sure that your contracts clearly state what can and cannot be done or said, and then monitor their activities. Have monthly, quarterly reviews of what is published on their social media so that you can at least, police what's going on, and again, mitigate the risks of receiving a warning letter, or worst case scenario, see your license revoked or end up with a lawsuit on your hands.
I love it. And that's why we have expert attorneys like Henry and Natalie here to help guide us. And I recently attended a National Advertising Division law conference, and they dedicated a whole section to influencer and affiliate marketing. So I expect to see more and more enforcement on that side. And I think everyone on stage is aware that a few weeks ago, the FTC sent out 700 letters to company, put them on notice. A lot of these had to do with influencers not disclosing the material connection with a hashtag ad, hashtag sponsor above the line. So huge enforcement trend to watch out for here. So let's move over to state regulations. So Henry, this one's for you. Now each state has its own nuanced regulations. I like to joke and say I had a lot more hair on my head before every state came out with their own hemp regulations, because it's a lot, and you've got a full head of hair. Good genetics here. It's a lot to keep up with. So there's a lot to know when navigating the hemp sales and marketing world. So do you have any recommendations for companies on how they can navigate this legal minefield without actually getting into trouble or mitigating the risk?
Well, one way to do it, of course, is to hire a law firm that can help you with that. My firm, we have a matrix that we try to update on a regular basis that identifies all the relevant regulations state by state, even by locality, and try to keep our clients abreast of changes. Now, nobody's perfect. Regulations are changing all the time. There's this, overlying web of multiple different state jurisdictions and local ones. So obviously paying somebody to do that work for you is a great way to do it. You also want to try to stay up on relevant topics as well and just keep your finger on the pulse of what's going on. I know Asa's group is really good about keeping people updated as well if you want to join that. They send out regular letters and emails about changes in laws.
Thanks for that. So I also wanted to ask, is there such a thing as a 50-state compliant hemp label, or is this an urban myth like Sasquatch or Bigfoot?
It's an urban myth as far as I'm concerned, because there are, as I said, there's so many different regulations, and some of them conflict with each other. So it's just not possible to have a 50-state compliant hemp label. I don't think it's possible in a whole host of other places, because there's just different information about where the QR code is supposed to be, how much you need to disclose about the ingredients. It's not just hemp. I mean, it's cosmetics in general, stuff like that. It's just there is no one size fits all.
Thank you so much for that. Natalie, anything to add on that?
Yeah, I would agree with you, Henry, but I do think that a good rule of thumb is to, if you're not, very few companies have the money to come up with, labels for each jurisdiction where they're selling their product. That's, crazy, really. I don't know of any company that does that. But I think one helpful thing to keep in mind is to go basically with the most stringent labeling requirements. So albeit there's some contradictory things, but overall I think that those labeling requirements have become pretty standard across states. And if you go with the more stringent requirements, then it means that you'll be in compliance in states where they may not mandate that you have the expiration date listed on the information panel, as opposed to having it as part of your QR code. Like, I think that there are ways for you to drastically mitigate the risks of enforcement actions But again, it requires due diligence and working with a law firm and a compliance team that's very familiar with these regulations, so that you can be as in compliance as can be at this point in time.
Thanks for that. I love that. So we actually have two wonderful law firms up here that can help you with that. So we're in for a real treat today. If this was billing by the hour, it'd be potentially a lot of money. So we're in for we're very fortunate and blessed to have these folks here today. So Adam, I wanted to ask, how do you approach state regulations and product registration and labeling? Are there certain states, such as Louisiana, that with really restrictive labeling requirements that you just stay out of?
So for our company, we are used to strict regulations because we grew up in the California regulated THC market. So as we extended into the CBD market, we were able to leverage a lot of the strict guidelines there. Of course, it's a completely different market, and to the points made just before me, it's important to get good legal advice in terms of compliance. We sell through Vitamin Shop as well as online, and so that provides a filter. So for folks that want to sort of reverse engineer where the risk might be if you're concerned about this issue, states like Louisiana, there's a lot of work that's been done now that you can leverage off of, and I think Vitamin Shop themselves stays out of certain states because of some of these requirements, and so that provides a template to work off of. For us, we go with what Nathalie was suggesting, which is to have a fully compliant package that we feel comfortable selling online and through these national retailers, and then I guess taking the risk really in selling in certain states. Although I think you can, for your online operation, you can put those guidelines in place with your 3PL, the third-party logistics company that's going to fulfill the orders, and tell them we're not going to sell to Louisiana because we don't want that risk, and that's what we do for DTC.
Awesome, thanks so much. So we got about 10 minutes more. Any questions out there in the crowd? Please feel free to line up here at the microphone. Don't be shy. I believe it's sanitized, it's clean, it's a microphone. As people are potentially lining up, I'm going to ask you a question, Nathalie. So this wouldn't be a legal discussion without talking about Delta 8. So Nathalie, how are you and your clients navigating the world of isomer cannabinoids such as Delta 8, Delta 10, that type of thing?
I mean, to be perfectly candid with you, my firm and the clients I work with have shied away from Delta 8 and any intoxicating cannabinoids. I'm sure all of you in this room are aware of the fact that a growing number of states have banned the substance, partially due to the fact that there's still a lot of, it's still in a gray legal area, particularly under federal law and the DEA's position and the interim final rule. There's a lawsuit that's going on this matter, but really until a court or quite frankly Congress clarifies the situation about what synthetic THC means and whether or not intoxicating cannabinoids like Delta 8 or Delta 10 it's going to be an incredibly risky endeavor. And when it comes to states that are authorizing and regulating these cannabinoids, have decided to treat it as part of the recreational marijuana market. So that would mean that as hemp stakeholders, you would have to secure a different kind of license and comply with even more stringent requirements. So it's totally feasible, but what we do, at least at my firm, is clients who really want to go down that path only sell these products and manufacture products in states where A, it's expressly authorized, and B, it's regulated. And there aren't very many of them right now. So that's kind of my 2 cents, but of course I'm an attorney, so I'm risk averse, and I'm always going to take the more conservative approach. But yeah, I'm sure Henry has more to say about that.
Yeah, please, and then Adam. Yeah.
So I've given my clients a legal written memo that I think Delta 8 is legal under the 2018 Farm Bill. I think it's pretty clear. The Farm Bill expressly carved out Delta 9 and amended the Controlled Substances Act and said Delta 9 is the only illegal cannabinoid found in the cannabis plant. And so Is Delta 8 similar to Delta 9? Sure it is, but it expressly says Delta 9 is illegal and everything else is legal. That's like saying all seafood is legal except for lobster. Crab is pretty similar to lobster, so I might say it's better, but it's not lobster, and therefore if everything else is legal, so too is Delta 8 and crab in that example. On the other hand, you know, fighting the Fed is a hard thing to do. So what I've told my clients is, I think it's legal. This gives you a little bit of a backstop, but you need to be careful, particularly in states that have come out and said it's illegal. I live in Colorado and I practice there. The Colorado Department of Public Health has tried to say that they think Delta 8 is illegal along the similar mistaken lines that the DEA is doing. I mean, could the legislature, the US legislature and the legislature in Colorado come out and make Delta 8 illegal? Absolutely, they could do that. They just haven't done it yet. And agencies like the DEA, the Colorado Department of Public Health, they don't write laws. And so, you know, that's been my opinion. But again, I'm not sure that I would take that opinion to court if I were you.
I would just add that, yeah, I think there's a moment in time that as a side hustle, you might be able to make some money with this. But if you're trying to build a long-term sustainable business, I would suggest you'll run into problems in the reasonably near future.
Great comments. Thank you. Any questions? Yes, please.
I just have a question about the influencers, because I got a big fat no from Snapchat and Instagram as far as like people. I'm not supposed to promote the product with any physical or even cartoon images of people. So I was just wondering how to do that, because I don't know how TikTok is, but I know that once it feeds from TikTok to Instagram to the stories over on Facebook, I'm hitting all social media platforms, and Snapchat and Instagram have said no. It can only be hands holding the product or like body parts, but you can't have an actual physical image. So I'm at a lot of influencers.
What's the product?
It could be ingestibles, tinctures, or lotions. They're allowing me to do lotion, but just the hands, not an actual influencer. So I can't be on the platform talking or even applying it or anything like that. So can I do an influencer? Because I got a big fat no from them.
Well, my company, Legends of Hemp, that's all we do. And we don't use Snapchat yet, but we do a lot of work on Instagram and we post stuff on YouTube. And what we often do is we have the influencers themselves post videos on their own account. And we also have an account for the brands that will repost stuff. Another thing that we found that you can do that's very effective is the Instagram Live, because it's only up there for a little while and there seems to be less of an opportunity to take that down or ding you. So we often will have the influencers, you know, wake up in the morning and take a tincture, put it in their coffee, or rubbing a salve on their knee after working out, something like that. And we haven't had a whole lot of issues. Again, smoking, things like that, they seem to take down quick. But if they're not doing that, we haven't had too much of an issue.
Good comments. Thank you. And we have 5 minutes more, so I want to make sure your question gets answered, gentlemen, and then the gal in back. I want to make sure we get to both of you here in 5 minutes. Thank you.
Yeah, hi. Is there a state's label that you would recommend as far as that matches that most stringent criteria you were talking about earlier?
Well, it depends on the product category, but states like Texas, Utah, even New York, even though these regulations have yet, they have yet to be adopted. They'll be adopted in November unless the CBD decides to amend these regulations. But I'd say those jurisdictions have pretty comprehensive regulations. Same with Colorado, although Colorado doesn't regulate cosmetics. So, you know, you have to understand what kinds of products you're working with. But I think these states that I just mentioned are a good starting point because, yeah.
Of course, with certain states like California, there's state-specific stuff like a huge California warning label. So you need a sticker strategy as well. So don't just print all your boxes, but leave a space for stickering so you can adjust.
And Prop 65 is a big one. Not that, you know.
Indeed. Thank you.
So there are a lot of different marketing philosophies that I've heard of, and I've heard of one tip that is to keep your website off of your social media platforms. Do you guys, with the legal background, think that there is any benefits to compartmentalizing your marketing strategy?
I think it depends on what you're marketing on your social media, right? Like if you're kind of on the cutting edge with your social media, maybe giving medical claims that you perhaps shouldn't be giving or wouldn't want to address, have go to your website, that might help you. I mean, if it's the same name, same company name on your social media that it is on your website, I don't think the FDA or the FTC is going to care whether or not there's a link to your website on there. If your company is making claims that they don't like, they're going to come down on you regardless of whether there's a link to your website on there.
I would just say, by definition, it's more of a commercial than a regulatory thing, meaning each company itself has their own sets of regulations. But I'm in agreement with what Henry's saying. The linking between them, I don't think it's sort of a distinction without a difference. But you do need to do a deep dive as to what you can say on each of the websites, and that might imply where you might need we had a full separate website that only says hemp to be able to link it to Facebook, for instance.
That's a great question. So at this time, we have no more time, but I'll be milling around. I think we'll be milling around on the right side of the stage. So let's give a big round of applause to our wonderful panelists here. And if